I'm happy that you join for the second diversity talk we do, and now we'll do in AVL RACETECH. My name is Lohr. I am the Director Motorsport at AVL RACETECH. It's a department, more or less, of AVL, the world's biggest engineering company in private hands. I had a long career in racing, over 30 years, but now I'm in this position, very happy, since 2.5 years. And as I said in the beginning, welcome. Really happy you joined for our second talk. We did that last year, and this year with a little bit of a different setup, but two of last year's protagonists are again with me. The first is Tatiana Calderón, who is following AVL RACETECH, will know her because she's one of our beloved and admired, definitely, brand ambassadors for our AVL RACETECH brand. And the second one has been with us last year also. Warm welcome to Richard Morris, the founder of the initiative Racing Pride. Yeah, we are very happy that you're with us. We want to give some inside views of the world of motorsport, but let me first give these two guys the chance to introduce themselves a little bit. And for this time, Richard, it's ladies first. Tatiana, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Ellen, Richard. It's a pleasure to be with you again this year. I think I learned a lot as well on our chat last year. So I'm a very proud AVL ambassador, like you said as well. So at the moment, I'm racing in European Le Mans Series, currently in Madrid, preparing for our next race next weekend.
Thank you. And Richard?
Hello, yes, absolute pleasure to be here again. As you can probably hear, I'm from the UK. I'm a professional racing driver too, also racing in prototypes, currently driving for a manufacturer called Revolution in the European Sports Prototype Cup. And as Ellen said, I'm also the founder of Racing Pride. So let's dive into the topic directly. Can you say some words about the initiatives for those who don't know what Racing Pride is? Though the name already tells a lot, I have to say. Yeah, I'm glad you like the name. It took a little while to come up with, but I think it says everything it needs to. Yes, Racing Pride was an initiative launched in June 2019 by myself and some other people within the motorsport industry here in the UK. It initially was a UK movement, bringing together ambassadors who were drivers, but also engineers, mechanics, volunteers, officials in the media, in all the aspects of motorsport, who were LGBTQ+, and who wanted to advance LGBTQ+ inclusion through the sport. We've grown a lot since those humble beginnings in June 2019, and we now have a mixture of ambassadors, partners, and individual Racing Pride members in not just the UK, but across Europe, North America, Australia as well, members on 4 continents in 17 countries. And we're partnered with a number of Formula One teams. We have official partnerships with Aston Martin Formula One, Alpine Formula One, and Red Bull Formula One, who joined us this year. And we've also worked with Mercedes and Williams too. We work across a number of strands of what we do. One of the most important things is visibility. We felt like there was a lack of representation of LGBTQ+ people in the sport previously. There had been so few out drivers and people in other roles that we wanted to show that you could be LGBTQ+ and be successful in this sport. We also wanted to have a visible movement that what we call allies could be part of, people who aren't LGBTQ+ themselves, but want a way of expressing their support for the community to show that there are people across the sport who want to make it inclusive for everyone. Community is a second big thing for us. So obviously bringing all these people together, and we also have our membership community, as I said, hundreds of members now, which is fantastic to try and break down a sense of isolation which you can feel when you don't see other people like you around you in the sport. And then the other thing we do is education, and that's one of the major things that we're working with our partners on, having sessions such as this, of course, and spreading a little bit of knowledge, information about the experiences of LGBTQ+ people in the sport and what everyone can do to help to make things more inclusive.
We will for sure have, we'll talk about a bit deeper. That was just the general introduction. What made you said we felt that there was not enough representation. Actually, there was no representation of LGBTQ plus in motorsport as far as I could see that. And so when you said there was not enough, it's the kind words. What was it from a personal reason that you started it, that you felt some problems when you were starting your racing career in the sport? Because one thing I recognized, which is really interesting about Racing Pride, in all your ambassadors, it seems to be, first of all, easier for women to come out because you have many more female visible lesbian ambassadors than male. And the second thing, but this I want to speak about a bit later, is the situation in North America, where you have some gay guys coming out. But as far as I can see, it's just you in Europe as a male came out. So there seems to be different, like it's a different in the sport itself when it comes to the let's say the percentage of women in the sport compared to men. There is a kind of similarity when we look at in numbers. But so was it? What made you feel we have to do something, and are you happy with the successes? Many questions in one question. Sorry to give you the possibility to tell about your story also, because like I'm saying, it's obvious that you are still the only male in Europe, which I find a bit strange.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that is certainly a lot of questions, a lot of big questions. Yes, there was a degree of personal experience in this. I think when you mentioned the lack of representation and visibility, you're right, it has been extremely low in the past. And when it comes to gay male drivers, there has only been one that we know about in Formula One, a guy called Mike Bootler, who raced in the early 1970s for a couple of years and wasn't out publicly, but some people in the paddock knew that he was gay, and indeed he ended up dying of AIDS very sadly after he retired from the sport. Other people have come out since retiring from being active racing drivers. So people like Hurley Haywood, multiple Le Mans winner, who spoke in his biography about how he didn't feel he could be out while he was racing. It was only once he'd stopped racing that he could be out. So yeah, there was a huge lack of representation. There was also a huge lack of vocal support from racing brands. So when we started Racing Pride in 2019, none of the Formula One teams had ever said anything about Pride at all. Not that they said anything negative necessarily, but they hadn't said anything supportive either. And there'd just been this sort of silence. And yeah, as I was coming into the sport, into karting in my early teens, I was starting to take karting more seriously. I'd always wanted to be a driver, but I was very conscious as I was growing up that I wasn't like the image of the drivers that had been presented to me as a kid. I didn't feel like these ultra macho drivers, and I started to realize as well that I might be gay as I was also making my journey into karting. And that was quite difficult, firstly, to feel like I didn't fulfill most people's sort of expectations of a driver. But also when I'd go to things like motorsport shows, the only women I'd see were basically wearing nothing and across cars. And the idea was, if you like cars, you like this. The two go together. That's who you are if you're going to be in this sport. And that had a bit of an impact on me, made it harder for me to come out. I heard people using bad language against the LGBTQ plus community in the paddock, using offensive terms, telling offensive jokes about gay people, not because they thought it would upset me, because they didn't know that I was gay, but just because that was how they spoke. And it made it harder to think about coming out to those people. And in my early experiences, where I did start to come out to one or two people, I also had some negative reactions at that stage, and that kind of drew me away from feeling able to talk about it more widely, more openly for the majority of my career, until after I'd been in single seaters and I'd moved into prototypes and I felt a little more established, a little more secure, and also like I could do a little bit more by being more visible myself, by starting to change things. And I think, you know, obviously you opened up a lot of big questions about the differences within the LGBTQ plus community in terms of comfort level and so on. I think all strands of the LGBTQ plus community do obviously face challenges, and a lot of them are similar challenges. But perhaps, as you highlighted, one that was particular to me as a gay man was that there was such an established image of what a male racing driver is like, and I was conscious of being different to it. Whereas perhaps some of my colleagues at Racing Pride, who are female driver ambassadors for us, they feel a lot of the issues that I'm sure Tatiana will talk about, of being a woman in a sport that has still far too few female drivers. But perhaps one upside, if there is an upside to that negative, is that they have a little more of a chance to be a female racing driver on their own terms, because there is less expected of what a female racing driver will be like, because simply there haven't been as many. But also I think there are stereotypes in sport, obviously, that sport isn't really for gay men, whereas across sports we do see a lot more out women in sports. And I think that is actually a fantastic thing that there are more out women in sports. And I think if we can make progress on more gender equality in motorsport and make it less of a men's sport, then we'll also see progress on LGBTQ plus inclusion, because environments which are more welcoming for women are also more welcoming for LGBTQ plus people, and the other way around.
Absolutely believe in that as well. And I had to laugh a bit when you said the representation of women I saw on exhibitions were half naked women, you know, sitting on the cars to make sexy photos. This is exactly how I grew up. Was there a difference because you are, I don't know, 25 years younger? I didn't count it, Tatiana. But was it the same? This representation of women was that also always had to be a sexy touch. They didn't have to be good. The result was not so important because nobody did expect anything. No knowledge about technology was expected, nothing. But this is not what we want as race car drivers. Female race car drivers want to win like male race car drivers, or most of them, let's say like that. Do you still struggle nowadays, or did you struggle at the beginning of your career with these stereotypes which you met in the motorsport world when it came to women?
Absolutely, Ellen. I think, you know, I felt identified with Richard when he was talking, you know, and it's still like this macho world. Like, I remember one of my engineers recently, and I was quicker than my teammate in one of the high-speed corners. And he was like, okay, where are your balls, you know, to the other driver? Like that kind of language, it just tells you everything about how things are still being very difficult. And I think as I grew up, I had not that much representation of female racing drivers coming obviously from Colombia. I like recently we launched a book to change stereotypes, and a little bit of what my story tells in the book is about, like, you know, it was fine when we show up in the track and, you know, everyone was like, oh, great to see female drivers. But the minute you start to be competitive, boom, everything is like, oh my God, no, how can I be beaten by a girl? The parents, then the boys, they started like, okay, no, I cannot be beaten by a girl, or maybe she has a better go-kart. That all these doubts that came to you, right? So I think, like, even just recently that we saw that the grid girls were taken out of Formula One. It's been not that many years, but if you go to Japan, you still see grid girls around you and in other series. So I feel like there's so much more to be done. I don't know how, like, I don't think we have come that far in over 20 years. I met with some of the girls that started karting recently in Colombia. I was surprised to see so many girls, and I was asking about these kind of barriers, and they were telling me, oh, it's still the same. So I think we need to speak more about this kind of problems, about taking out stereotypes in sport, but also in motorsport. So I think sessions like today, and the more we can spread the word and combine all areas to make it a more accessible sport, is always going to be very helpful.
When I was driving DTM, by the way, I refused to have a grid girl. I absolutely did not like it. I felt offended by that. They were very, you know, whatever, latex dresses, stuff like that. So I had a grid boy, which was a kind of invention. We are still friends till today. Yeah, that is one. The stereotypes, how to overcome stereotypes is the same. If you're a gay man, there are so many stereotypes, especially in the male world, like the motorsport world. If you're a woman in the motorsport world, there are still so many stereotypes because it's so easy. You know, you don't have to. It's just easy to find your place as a male, hetero male man. To say it's my place, motorsport. That's where I belong. So there are many initiatives also for women in motorsport. There's a lot going on. What I find is that's not so supportive. The Formula One teams are not very supportive when it comes to women in motorsport. But it looks like they are supportive, as at least Richard, half of them, when it comes to pride. Or is it just a bit of do they just a little bit, or do you really have the feeling the teams you work with are into it and really want to help?
Yeah, so we do now have, as you say, partnerships with getting on for half of the grid, and I'm confident that you'll see that number continue to grow. There are some exciting conversations going on behind the scenes. I think it is fantastic that we are getting to that point where there are teams working on this. Certainly the teams that we are working with in partnership, the whole premise of partnering with Racing Pride is that we don't just put out supportive tweets or just have rainbows on things or, you know, only talk. We do go and do policy work with the teams internally, workshops with the teams that go from the most senior management through to newcomers to the team. So when we did a workshop recently at Red Bull, Christian Horner attended, Jonathan Wheatley attended, you know, people right at the very top of the team, all the way down to students coming into the team. And so when a team partners with Racing Pride, it is about far more than just putting a Happy Pride Month tweet or just putting a logo on a car. And I think that's really important because the LGBTQ plus community is rightly very wary of brands which just say that they care once or twice a year, but aren't really doing anything behind it. And it has been, you know, not easy to get that support at the highest level of motorsports. It's, you know, taken a huge amount of work, and I understand to some extent, obviously, we had to establish ourselves as an initiative and show that we could do these meaningful things and get the right people in place to be able to work at that type of level. I think there is still, and obviously we're only partnered with, you know, just under half the grid. I think there is still a little reluctance, possibly is too strong a word, but concern perhaps from some brands in talking about LGBTQ plus inclusion, which is a bit of a shame. You know, I think some brands see it as in some way controversial or perhaps political to talk about LGBTQ plus inclusion, not just in Formula One I'm talking now, I mean in the motorsport world in general. They go, well, why would we talk about something that is a little controversial? And I think that's, you know, that is very sad because obviously I don't live being gay as a political statement. I am just myself living with the person I live with, loving the person I love. It's not done to be controversial. And I think we also need to realize that if we look not necessarily across every country, but if you look at countries like the UK, perhaps a quarter to a third of people aged 18 to 24 are LGBTQ plus, identify as LGBTQ plus. Far more of that generation are also allies to the LGBTQ plus community. And of course, motorsport, the automotive industry, the engineering industry are trying to recruit from exactly that pool of talent. And I think if the industry doesn't express its support for LGBTQ plus people or create safe and welcoming environments for them, it risks missing out on a huge amount of young talent that would otherwise come into the sport and industry, and a huge amount of young audiences, young viewers, young supporters, fans who want to feel like their views, their values, and ultimately themselves are reflected in the sport that they are looking to become part of, that they're interested in following. It's a fantastic way of engaging people. And just briefly on that last point, I think brands see that when you post about pride, when you talk about LGBTQ plus inclusion, there will be some people who still feel it's okay to push back against that, to be openly homophobic, biphobic, transphobic in their comments that they put and so on. But realistically, when someone posts something negative like that online, they're not really going to unfollow the brand or stop watching Formula One. Their anger isn't going to last any more than the time it took them to write that tweet. But you see many more likes and shares and people, you know, who do engage with that content. And we constantly hear from people who send gushing emails and letters about how moving they find it to have these teams, have these brands talking about these issues, telling them that they matter. And that connection that you create with people is so much more powerful and will last so much longer. You know, they will always remember the team, the brand that cared about them. And I think that's a really powerful connection that, you know, the sports and the broader industry can, you know, engage with.
You can also translate that directly into the female topic, because half of the world is female. So a lot of potential missing if we do not stronger address them as engineers, as drivers, as everything, and give them role models. But when we talk about Formula One, I wanted to ask you, Tatiana, because you were in the last decades the woman who was the closest to the Formula One ever. You drove Formula 2 until last year. You had the chance to be for a year, I think, in 2016, 18, please correct me, to be part of the Alfa Romeo Formula One team. I would say, of course, because Monisha Kaltenborn, a woman, was leading the team, made things easier because she was obviously in LA when it came to female in motorsport topics. But nevertheless, my personal feeling is that the Formula One world is so not ready to have a woman or support a woman. Though we see many initiatives, also the Formula One Academy, where only women are driving now, and with the word Formula One in it, there's a kind of support, but not really if you see what the teams are doing. What the hell is going on there, and what needs to change?
I completely agree with you, Ellen. Sometimes we get this question, right? Like, when is a woman gonna get ready for Formula One? And I think the question is the opposite, right? Because like, I don't know, five years ago, so 6 years ago, we had both Monisha and Claire Williams as team principals. I think that like helped when you looked at Susie Wolf or Jamie Chadwick. They got in because there was a woman that wanted to give them a chance to prove themselves. In my case, it was, like you said, with Monisha. And then I managed to stay a couple of more years there. But I think there's a mentality, like what we said, it's like very macho. Like when you look at Drive to Survive, we are not featured enough. Like, you have amazing engineers that you could have interview, like Hannah in Red Bull, Christine in Alfa Romeo, Ruth. So there's a lot more that could have been done to promote female participation, not only as a driver, but in other areas, yet they didn't do it. So I think that they don't want somebody to go and you know, make sure that or show that the other drivers, they're humans, you know, they don't have to be super macho to be driving a car. And I think that's something that it's been like this for so many years, that to change it will take a lot of time. And I think you need new blood coming to as team principals, in my opinion. And right now with the F1 Academy, and you know, we saw the W Series unfortunately failed, and then we do something similar but with the F1 name, and then everyone thinks that they're doing already something. So in my point of view, it's just going backwards, and it's not being shown what they should have been like. You know, the cars being designed with male measurements, and you know, when you go to cars that have no power steering, the way we have to train, because we are different. It doesn't mean better or worse, just different. So I think there's a lot of education that still needs to happen, and when you come to the highest level, even more to adapt to us certain things, to show our potential, and for those teams to give us a proper opportunity. Because like, you know, sometimes you can be very quick, but if you don't have the material and the people around you taking the right decisions, there's nothing you can do, and you're not having a proper chance.
That's one of the biggest discriminations I felt, and it seems nothing changed. That you get the worst material, last year's material, not the same testing possibilities, etc., not the same information and communication within the team. Still, it seems to be still the same. Yeah, everybody wants to have a woman in the team, but the team may want to win, but management is some steps behind very often. That's what I feel for Formula One, by the way, because we know many teams are open to Racing Pride. I'm very happy that half of the field is already working with you, though I also ask myself, what is going on with the other half? Why are they not supportive? But it's the same with Formula One. They are not really supportive when it comes to women in motorsport. And since I work for AVL, I'm more often in the Formula One paddock. I can see that they're all happy that they have Hannah Schmitz or the one or other engineer. They do all the interviews, etc. But they can be done a lot more. But when it comes to the driver's side, there's still the glass ceiling, which is unbreakable. So what do you think, should the FIA, which is our highest motorsport authority, put more pressure? Meanwhile, I'm so bored of all that. I'm so having enough after decades of nothing moving forward, that I want to ask and want to push for compulsory tests for women, compulsory, maybe third cars, whatever. You know, there's not only the best talent in Formula One at the moment, there's also guys who came there with money of their families, etc. So there is no reason why you would say only the super bests should show their talent in Formula One. I'm pretty sure we have 3, 2, 5, whatever women in the world at the moment who could do good results, even in Formula One. But there is no chance to get into such a car, not even for a test drive. So do we need much more pressure? What do you think?
I absolutely think we need that pressure. Like you said, like even a couple of years back, I did a Formula E test that was compulsory to have a woman in Saudi. So they had to look for girls. All the teams had to run a girl. And because of that test, I got another test, because then they were like, oh, okay, this girl can drive. So we may as well take her for the next test. And sometimes we need that kind of pressure to show them what we can do, because otherwise, like you were saying, when you don't have the material and maybe you don't have somebody that understands how you drive, and we don't feel like we have all that behind us, there's no way you can do a lap time and show them what you can do and get the results that it's like a circle. So they're like, okay, if you don't win in Formula 2, you cannot jump into Formula 1. But how can I win if you're not giving me the same opportunity as the guys that are winning, right? So it's that circle that I think only can be break if we put that pressure and we say, look, we just want an opportunity, have a third car, test this and this girl, and give her proper like preparation. For example, when I tested in Mexican Formula One for the first time, it was the new generation car. I had not been in Mexico. I almost had to beg for a simulation that was not part of everything. And I only got like 20 laps with media. So what are you really trying to do with giving me that chance when I know that other drivers, they did a private test before in an old car? So we are not looked at it in the same way. Of course, there is a benefit sometimes to have a girl in the team, but it should not only be like the marketing. That could be a way to try and open the door, but you have to deliver, but being given that opportunity. So if you can push for for the third car, or for making it obligatory at the end to test a girl, that I think is the answer that we've been waiting for over 20 years.
Yeah, even longer, absolutely. There's one similarity as well, is there, question to Richard, because there's one strong group of supporters of women in motorsport, and that are the fans. The fans are strongly supporting every successful or even not successful woman in motorsport. What about the fans and the pride movement in motorsport? How do you interact? What do you feel? I mean, you said there are mainly positive posts, well reception, etc. But for example, there is for sure a difference between North America and Europe, isn't? So how do the fans react in the specific countries? Do you also face problems with them potentially?
Yeah, again, there's so much that could be said here. I just wanted to pick up first on the conversation you just had with Tatiana about governing bodies, because I think there's also a role here for governing bodies in general to be more assertive about how they want to see the sport progress. And one of the things I do is I'm chair of the LGBTQ plus expert committee at Motorsport UK. I'd obviously, we're working on some things there around inclusion policies, giving resources and education to clubs and officials and things like that to try and actively improve experiences of LGBTQ plus people at tracks. I'd also love to see, Formula One and the FIA working, well, ideally with Racing Pride, but with the LGBTQ plus community to do the things that they can do. And I think where that's relevant to the question you've just asked is one of the major issues that confronts all teams and all drivers competing on a global level is the difference in LGBTQ plus rights in the territories that we go to. And I think when you talk about issues that affect the sport across teams and across series and across drivers, you do need the governing body to be stepping in to make sure that everyone who's part of this sport feels safe, feels protected in their working environments. And that's a piece that I would love to see Racing Pride being able to work on in the near future, because it's something that we can work with our teams on, but obviously it's something that, the sport as a whole needs to look at. So I think, although it would be a very different type of action, there's also a carryover with what you were talking about there of needing governing bodies to also be part of this progress. In terms of fan engagement, yes, we do have a lot of people who love to see LGBTQ plus drivers, and I do get a lot of amazing support from people on social media, and Racing Pride gets so much support, and it's amazing to see our member community growing. We have private servers that are obviously safe spaces for LGBTQ plus people in motorsport to communicate with each other, to support each other. I think that's been a huge positive that Racing Pride's been able to bring, from me not being conscious of having any LGBTQ plus people around me to now being able to connect up so many people is really wonderful. One of the reasons, of course, we do need to create those safe spaces is that social media as a whole is not necessarily that safe space. And I've certainly also felt, as someone who is obviously a leading figure in this movement, I have had, some nasty things sent to me and said about me and things like that, which obviously, you know, I'm sure is very, very similar to Tatiana's experience of being a leading woman in the sport. You know, people who want to resist change do target people who are making change happen, and that's a sad reality. I think it is very positive that Racing Pride has, as you say, some fantastic ambassadors in North American motorsport, some of them doing amazing firsts in terms of Travis Shoemake, who's one of our ambassadors. He's the first openly gay top-level drag racer in the US. We have Zandara Kennedy, who is one of our ambassadors. He's now in Formula Drift, the highest level of drift racing in the US, which has traditionally been a very sort of macho space. So they are sort of breaking the mold. I think where perhaps there's a lot of difficulty still internationally and particularly in the US, but certainly not only in the US, is for trans people. I know that there's been a lot of very heated media and political discussion about trans people in the US especially, and there are certain states such as Florida which have introduced very regressive laws, including in sport, and you do see that spilling over, you know, not just from the sports where those rules have been applied, but also into all sports, including motorsport. And I think that's a huge shame to see, you know, even countries that we might not immediately look at as being difficult for LGBTQ plus people actually taking some of those backward steps. I think when it comes to motorsport going to territories where being LGBTQ plus is actually illegal, of which there are some on the Formula One calendar, there are places where gay men can be put to death. That is obviously a very, very bad situation. It's extremely difficult. If I, as a driver, was to be asked to go and race in one of those territories, I honestly couldn't tell you now what I would say. It would be something I'd have to think really hard about. I do think motorsport needs to work to ensure that, firstly, as I already mentioned, anyone who is going to be part of the sport in those territories has that protection and support that they will need to make sure that they can be safe while in a global sport. Obviously, it shouldn't be the case that I'd have to worry about competing in a global level series because of my own safety. That shouldn't be a situation that anyone has to face. And I think we also need to be conscious that while I don't think you gain much by simply refusing to engage with these places, I know some people favor boycotting, and I can see the arguments for it. I personally don't think we gain much by pretending these places don't exist, but we do need to make sure as a sport that wherever we are in the world, while we're being sensitive to different cultures that exist, we're also being confident about what our own values are. And I think it's really impressive when we see teams and drivers who are prepared to stand up for what they believe wherever they are in the world. And you see that with someone like Lewis Hamilton wearing his rainbow helmet at every race throughout the F1 calendar, not saying I'm going to wear it in protest just at this event, or I'm going to wear it because it's easy at that event. They're saying all year, I believe in all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's a very positive thing which Hamilton did, actually. Absolutely, I totally agree to that. I remember one race from my career when I was in off-road racing. It would have been driving through Iran as well, and it was compulsory. Would have been compulsory for us to wear the headscarf under the helmet. So, of course, there are more females who participate in off-road racing, especially also co-drivers, many drivers everywhere. And we all refused. So finally, we did not drive the rally. The rally was not taking place, which I found is a good idea. When you see your situation, when you say, me as a gay man, I'm not sure if I would race in wherever I'm under pressure to go to prison or even worse. The community should not put you under pressure. It should be the same. The race should not take place there. Let's see if we get to this kind of dealing with situations like that in the future. When we, what I find is a very important thing you said in the beginning, it was the allyship. You see, you work on allies. And I hope that the company I work for, AVL RACETECH, can show themselves or AVL can show themselves as allies and supporters. One of the reasons why we do these diversity talks. It could be a much bigger round. We just recently did a female engineer program within the company, because also it's the same, like you said, about the LGBT plus community. It's important to support women for the brand and for our future, because we need educated people to work in our company. So we should not forget facing or addressing female engineers as well. But when we talk about the allyship, it's very important for both of the topics you stand for here at the moment, the LGBT plus Q+ community and women in the motorsport world, let's say, not only as a driver. And when I look at your helmet in the background, Tatiana, you have a strong ally, Bishota. Please tell us 2-3 words about that, because that is a very good example for female empowerment and support, I think.
Absolutely. You know, I think I've been fortunate enough to get to know you more personally as well, and you've been helping us a lot since 2018, 2019 for Super Formula. I remembered as well, and I wouldn't be racing in European Le Mans series if it wasn't for you. So I think it also, you know, the same as like with Monisha, we have to, all females, we should also push for a better, more inclusive motorsport industry. And like you said, Bichota is Carol G, so she's a Colombian artist that after I was racing in IndyCar last year, the main sponsor of the team stopped paying, so I found myself without a drive, and Carol G, we somehow connected to her. She has her manager is her sister, so it was a very similar story from Colombia, and she decided to support my career as well, to go back to Formula 2 and to try and send the message of, you know, there are a lot of companies that sponsor sports, but when you look at the percentage of that sponsorship that goes to female athletes, is 1%, and that's talking about like even US. So she wanted to say, okay, there's no other company that wants, or a couple of companies that want to save this girl in this male-dominated sport. I'm gonna try and give you that support, and it's been amazing to get to know her group of working girls as well, and to try and showcase more women, and saying that we have to stick together and hopefully open some doors from other companies that maybe are starting to look at it in a different way. So thanks to her and to you and women that want to support us, I think we can start to climb the ladder together.
That gives me a good way to go to one of the questions asked in the chat, because now you mentioned 2 women supporting you, but we need support of many more people around the world to get women into Formula 1. So the question, I don't know if you can read it, is, Tatiana, do you feel that women support each other enough, or do they also feel too much competition? It's a good question. What do you think about the new Formula 1 Academy? I think we talked about that. Will we see future female Formula 1 drivers developing there in the Formula 1 Academy? This we did not talk about. So these 2 questions. Is there sometimes too much competition between the few women who make it to the kind of top of motorsport? And what do you think about Formula 1 Academy? Will we see a girl developing to Formula 1 from there?
No, it's a really good question, because you get both sides, right? There are other girls that want you to do better, and they want you to keep growing, and there are some others that feel that competition and that fear of, okay, I'm now not the only one. And I think that's a bad mentality to have, because I think we have to push each other. At the end of the day, we are competing against the best, regardless of gender, and if somebody is better than you, then you should learn from them. push yourself for more things. So unfortunately, there are some that maybe aren't as open-minded as we would like, and therefore we need more women in top positions as well to open those doors and not to close it down. And regarding F1 Academy, and I know some of the F1 Academy drivers, and I think, you know, with the right guidance and with the right opportunities, they can be successful. But there's still a lot that needs to be changed in the environment for us to do great things. And the thing that I miss about F1 Academy is that, okay, you do well in the series, but then there's like a huge difference from the budget side, from F4 to F3. And who's gonna try and take care of that is my next question, because it's all connected, right? So let's hope that all that effort that they're putting in there, that at some point it works out for the next champions in that series.
Richard, when we talk about support for women, it's really support to give them the chance to go to Formula One. When we talk about gay men or LGBTQ plus community in motorsport, it's more about the visibility, etc. So what do you think? Should there be a support to push a gay man into Formula One as well?
I think there's a lot of...
Do you see a woman first in Formula One or a gay man? Or a gay woman?
And I think we've, you know, we've seen a very small number of LGBTQ plus people in the past in Formula One. They just haven't been, as I said, open about it until perhaps later on in their lives, or have kept it quiet, you know, while they've been racing, that kind of thing. But it's been a very small number in any case. I mean, to my knowledge, we're maybe talking about 5 drivers, of whom one was a gay man and one was a bi man. But, you know, we're also not talking drivers, you know, it's been decades since we've even known of there being anyone LGBTQ plus who hasn't been sort of out. I mean, it is there is that big lack of representation. I think one crossover from what Tatiana was saying is there are a lot of big brands that sponsor motorsport, and I think I would love to see more brands which do celebrate pride, which celebrate women in the workforce, which celebrate diversity and inclusion, putting those values into their sports sponsorship. What they want from sports sponsorship obviously is visibility and connection, and any driver, any team, any individual can give them that. And so I think the individuals they choose to support should reflect their values and be something that, you know, they're proud to support this individual because this individual represents something they believe in. And I think that's fantastic that obviously Tatiana has found someone to support, or, you know, multiple partners actually to support her this year who are doing exactly that, supporting Tatiana because she reflects something they believe in. And I think that's very necessary to move the sport forward. I think sponsors have a huge role to play in shaping ultimately who is able to have opportunities and access to success in the sport. And I think sponsors should consider that when deciding who to sponsor, which teams to partner with, and so on. And I think sponsors can also play a very important proactive role also in helping to shape what teams do by saying to teams, yes, we want to sponsor your team, but we want to see your team doing some good for the sport as well. You know, we will support your team, but we want to see your team's strategy on diversity and inclusion. We want to see what positive changes you're making. And I think, yeah, sponsors can play a really positive role in that respect. I think in terms of whether we'll see an openly gay male F1 driver or an openly LGBTQ plus F1 driver, I think what we need to do ultimately is to create a sport in which everyone feels safe to be themselves from the beginnings, from karting all the way up to Formula One, a sport where we've addressed these problems of hearing, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, where people are always themselves throughout their career. I think that's realistically the best way that we have people at the top of the sport who are LGBTQ plus, is by LGBTQ plus people never feeling they had to hide it in the first place and just being themselves throughout their career. And of course, there are then, in terms of speaking at the highest level, we do need to address these concerns about, are we ready really for an LGBTQ plus driver to feel safe and supported as they compete in a global championship? I think it'd be great if an F1 driver obviously came out as LGBTQ plus, and that of course would be a huge inspiration for people, but I don't think it would fix all of the problems. It's like having one female F1 driver wouldn't fix all of the problems of women in motorsport. We need to look at the system as a whole, as well as having visible role models.
That's something we always say. I think you agree, Tatiana. We should not talk about one woman in motorsport. We want to see 2, 3, even more when the talent is there. In a hopefully not too far future. I have a question from the chat, which I want to close this discussion with, and it's a part of a question. Would it be possible to convince the FIA to get rid of models, female models, and substitute them for model men? And I would say, here we are, no? A role for gay men in the grid. That is the worst I've ever said. No, but it's, we talked about that, of course. And the question is, which comes with this, also the visibility of gay men. Like you said, you're still the only one in Europe, which I find is a shame, because we know there are many more. And but the visibility has to be everywhere. And for this, I find it a fair question. I had my grid men. Why not mix it up, men and women in the grid? Why not show the beauty of the community, etc., in other roles than only in the racetrack engineers, whatever roles we did?
Yeah, I think
far, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think showing visibility in all roles at the track is obviously, you know, fantastic, and you know, I think it normalizing being LGBTQ plus is important. And you know, when I was growing up idolizing Michael Schumacher, it's not like he had this super macho image, but I did see him get out of the car and kiss Corinna and have grid girls and things. And obviously, you know, if we could provide alternatives to that imagery as well, so that we show that everyone is welcome, then that's obviously great. I mean, I think in terms of, you know, grid people, let's say, you know, maybe there are more empowering, uplifting things we can do with that opportunity as well. I think, you know, yes, you can have the grid being used to, you know, glamorize with having people who'll get a lot of camera attention and so on, but we can also use those opportunities in uplifting ways, such as, I know F1 had grid kids and things like that, and, you know, having people who represent causes, who represent something meaningful, represent the future. You know, I think you see that in other sports. You see football having mascots, a bit like the grid kids idea. You know, I think for me, it would be more productive to use those opportunities for visibility in a way that's more empowering for more people.
Yeah, positive, different views, different alternative views. I like that. That was how the question was meant. No stereotypes here in the game. Yeah, for me, that was a very nice talk, and I hope that our audience enjoyed it. Do you want to both give a last word? What you would wish when we talk next year, what has happened in the year that is then past?
First of all, thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Richard, for this space, AVL. I think it's important to speak about these barriers that are still there, because if we don't speak about them, nothing is going to change. So I'm hoping that maybe I'm thinking too far. One year is maybe not enough, but I would like to see definitely more inclusion in the sport, and that, you know, things start to really move forward, not only for women, but like you said, Richard, with your initiative. So thanks for this space and for creating, at least to people that are listening, you know, a different view of what it feels like to be in these positions.
Yeah, I like Tatiana, I just say thank you for hosting this conversation. I do think it's an important part of progress for large companies like AVL to be, using their platform internally and externally to have these conversations and to help to move things forward. Because I think, again, as Tatiana alluded to, allowing people to understand the experiences of minority groups in the sport will help them to empathize, and from empathy comes allyship and support. And I think one of the biggest issues that groups face is the fact that people perhaps just don't appreciate the challenges and the obstacles that are there. And when you can have these conversations, you can explain what they are, then people can understand and they can be motivated to make change. I think my hope for the next year is that, yes, the visibility of diversity and inclusion continues to increase in motorsport. Motorsport has moved quite a bit in recent years in terms of being more willing to talk about diversity and inclusion. But I really hope that this doesn't go from a phase where no one was talking about it to just a phase where everyone's talking about it, but still nothing's happening. It has to be backed up by policies and actions that make the conversations really meaningful.
Yeah, thank you very much, both. Thanks to the audience for listening. This time we recorded it, so tell your friends they can watch this conversation, this talk on our YouTube channel from AVL RACETECH, for those who would have loved to join but had to work or didn't have the time. Thank you very, very much. Looking forward for next year and see about the real changes. But I think we are all three pushing on all possible levels. Thanks for joining again, and thanks, and speak next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.